I'm Michael Hyatt. I'm here at the Willow Creek Association Global Leadership Summit. I'm talking with John Dickson, who's a pastor from Australia, who's a university teacher, who also is the co-director of the Center for Public Christianity, which is an independent research and media company promoting informed discussion about social, ethical, and religious issues in modern life. John, welcome. Good to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
I really want to talk about this issue of humility, which is your most recent book, which I'm sure you're proud of. But could you give us the basic premise? And it's called humilitas.
It is called humilitas,
from the Latin,
which is the Latin word, from which we get humiliation and humility. They both come from the same word. And funny story, I wrote to the publisher a couple of months before the book came out and said, "Stop press, I've got a much better title. Humility and How I Achieved It."
Perfect.
I hoped they got the joke, and then they sent back within a couple of hours. Their art department had put together a whole book cover based around it, with a great big grinning smile of me, with commendations all over the book by me.
Love it.
The best book I've ever written.
Perfect.
Anyway, I can't remember your question now. Humilitas.
Yes. What's the basic premise of the book?
That humility, rightly understood, makes the great greater. Not that humility will automatically make you great, or that you can't be great without humility. We all know humble people who aren't that great, and great people who aren't that humble, actually. But I do think that through history, some of the most influential and inspiring leaders have been people marked by this ability to hold their power for the good of others. Humility.
When you're trying to build humility into a team, or model it for your team and kind of drive it into the culture, what is important as a leader to do?
Be really open to criticism, number one.
Can I stop you on that? What does that look like?
Well, I think having a very clear open criticism policy. So I do with my teams, whether it's at the Center for Public Christianity or at my church, they all know, and the congregation knows, they are more than welcome to bring criticism directly to me. And I think that's really important, because criticism can be your best friend as a leader, because it's your fast track, either to finding out what communication problems you've got, or actually finding out real problems that you've got. You know, so even inaccurate criticism that on analysis you really don't think is accurate, is a great thing, because it tells you I need to do a little more communicating here, because some people are under this false impression. But criticism that is accurate, it's a godsend, literally.
It is a shortcut.
It's a shortcut. You can learn in 5 minutes of good criticism what would take you 6 months to bumble along on your own. So as painful as it is, I think I've grown to the point of loving criticism, not emotionally when I first hear it, but loving it in the macro, because it helps me and the team work out how we need to improve. So I think criticism is a really, a real key to developing leadership, a leadership culture.
I used to say to my team when I was a CEO that I wanted an environment that was safe for dissent, so that people felt like they could criticize me without fear of reprimand. And I think that does keep a lot of people back.
I think for Christian leaders it's a particular issue, because Christian leaders need to work out, particularly pastors, need to work out how to do leadership without holding on to structural power. So a leader has a number of tools to play with, I guess. You've got the natural ability that a leader would have that moved a leader into positions of authority. Then you have the structural authority that the company gives you, power to hire and fire and all that sort of stuff. But then there are the more sort of nebulous leadership tools of character, the kind of life you live that either compels or repels people, and persuasion, the ability to move people from here to there, as Bill Hybels would say. But the Christian leader has to work out how to do leadership without relying on structural authority. Because as I look through the New Testament, there is very little structural authority given to the pastor. The authority to appoint ministries, and to lay on hands and appoint ministries, yes. The authority to teach the Word of God, and I reckon that's about it. The rest of our leadership is about character and persuasion.
And that's always the most compelling, I think, to people.
I think of the people who have had most influence on my life. They didn't have any authority over me. But they had a character that I truly believed in, and they had a way of persuading me that going from here to there was really the best thing that I could possibly do. And if you think of people, I mean, obviously Jesus, but even moving through history, you think Gandhi, absolutely no structural authority, but he was an epoch changer. Nelson Mandela, no structural authority. Until, of course, he became president. But his influence was long before he had any authority. Martin Luther King, and so on, the list goes. It's possible to be an epoch changer and not have any mandate to legislate or hire and fire. And I think that's really inspiring for junior leaders, people who feel they have no structural authority in a company. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You can move people by the force of your character and persuasion. Just rely on that.
You know, one of the things, I've been around Christian celebrities, so to speak, all my career because I've worked in the publishing industry, and I've seen sort of the detrimental and corrosive effects of success. And what's the relationship in your mind between succeeding as a Christian leader and the importance of maintaining humility? And how do you do that? How do you balance that? How do you not lose your head in the midst of succeeding?
You have a wife like mine.
Yes. Or a wife like mine. I don't know your wife.
Who doesn't believe any of my press. Yeah. Actually, when I first met her, I was a singer in a band. And I thought I was pretty cool, but I could not impress her. She'd come to our concerts and she'd go, yeah, it was all right. She just didn't like our music. So from day one, I've had this wife who's just kept me, maybe not kept me humble, but helped me not believe any of the press. But in terms of building humility, I think there are a number of things that we can do as leaders. Number one, you've got to love humility to begin with. Yeah? Unless you actually highly value humility, there's no point pursuing it. But once you learn to love humility, I think we are transformed by what we love. And if you begin to see people who you deeply respect because of their humility, just beginning with loving the virtue of humility, that's the first step. Secondly, I think you find clear examples of humble people and watch them. And I think the man we meet in the Gospels is the epitome of humility. I think the other thing is thought experiments. I try this all the time. In history, my academic discipline, we try thought experiments where you might go to a new archaeological site and you're trying to work out what life would have been like and what this building might have been in relation to that. And you conduct a thought experiment. You project yourself into that space and you say, okay, well, we know how commerce worked in the ancient world. That would have meant they would have gone from here to there. And the thought experiment actually opens up possibilities for new fields of research because your thought experiment has given you a little scenario that you can pursue as an academic possibility, and then you find new evidence for it. Ethicists use this all the time. Philosophers use thought experiments. I think leaders should use it as well. And the way it works is, I'm just thinking of a recent example for me. I had to face a very difficult meeting where there were about 40 people who profoundly disagreed with a decision that I was making in my church. And I knew it would be a pretty hot meeting. So you know what I did? In the days leading up to it, I did some thought experiments of possible scenarios, what could go wrong, what person X might say. And what I did is I tried to imagine possible gracious replies, how to take the heat out of the meeting. And my going through scenarios enabled me to go to that meeting, and there were a few hot comments, nowhere near as hot as I had imagined, but a few hot comments. But the fact that I had already thought through,
you knew how you were going to respond.
How to keep the tone honouring to Christ and honouring to people who were being hurt, in a sense, by the decision I was making, actually took the heat out of the meeting. And I put it down to thought experiments, being able to do that. The last thing I'd say about humility, about how to cultivate humility, is realise that you're basically proud. I get that from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity says that the first step in the move toward becoming a humble person is to realise that you're not one.
That's really good.
And he said, once you realise you're not one, that's the first step. And when I read that, I thought, excellent, I must be on my way, because I'm not humble. So there are a few things.
It's like Alcoholics Anonymous almost.
You've just got to admit what is reality.
Yeah.
Until you can admit that, there's no hope for the humility path.
Well, as we're looking to models as leaders of people that have demonstrated humility, and not to mention anybody that's alive, but what are some people through history that aren't the ones we've mentioned, like Nelson Mandela or Gandhi, that really exemplify humility for you?
St. Augustine,
Yes.
who was one of the greatest theologians in the 5th century. He was a man who held his power for the good of others, which is how I'm defining humility. I
love that definition.
I don't think humility is about thinking of yourself less, thinking, oh, woe is me, I'm terrible. That's not humility. Humility is knowing all the power that you do have, but deciding to use it for others.
Yeah.
And that comes from Jesus. Jesus didn't think lowly of himself.
Right.
He
could speak up when he needed to.
And he knew who he was.
Yeah.
He knew he's the Lord God in the flesh. But what does he do? He gives himself for others. So that's what humility is. And St. Augustine, incredible mind, but used it for the good of others. And there's this beautiful story that we only have recent evidence of how he and his churches were involved in 5th century slave-freeing enterprises. After church, they'd go down to the shipyards and break free slaves, feed them, house them, and send them on their way
Amazing
free.
example. Yeah. John, thank you so much for spending these few minutes with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.